It started with a transfer no one could explain, $34 million moving through a Binance wallet linked to a scam compound in Myanmar, routed across 3 continents in less than 48 hours, and ending inside an account that US investigators couldn't even identify. To most agencies, it looked like just another piece of noise in the endless storm of crypto transactions. But to a small team inside the US Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, it was the beginning of something far bigger, a pattern pointing to a hidden network worth $7 billion. At the center of it stood Zhao Changpeng, known globally as CZ, the billionaire founder of Binance, the world's largest crypto exchange. For years, Binance had been marketed as the platform that made crypto safe, fast, and accessible. What the public didn't know was that behind the slogans and sponsorships lay a pipeline used by Chinese Triads, Myanmar scam syndicates, and Mexican drug networks, all moving money faster than regulators could track. By the time the Department of Justice stepped in, the network had already touched 180 countries, processed tens of millions through anonymous OTC brokers, and quietly become the backbone of some of the largest cyber fraud operations in Asia. The question haunting investigators was simple but alarming. How did a global criminal ecosystem operate in plain sight on the world's biggest crypto exchange? And how did it go undetected for so long? To answer that, we need to go back to the beginning, to the illusion that made Binance untouchable. Before the US government ever suspected a $7 billion laundering pipeline, Zhao Changpeng, known to the world simply as CZ, had already built an image so polished, so impeccably modern, that most people never questioned it. Born in Jiangsu, China, raised in Canada, and trained as a software engineer, CZ crafted the story of a self-made visionary who democratized finance. When he launched Binance in 2017, the crypto world saw him as the antidote to Wall Street: fast, transparent, global. Within months, Binance became the world's largest exchange by volume, a position it would hold for years. CZ leaned heavily into the mythology. He wore hoodies instead of suits, spoke softly, and treated crypto enthusiasts as a community rather than customers. Binance sponsored Formula One, Cristiano Ronaldo, K-pop campaigns, and a wave of influencers across Asia, Europe, and the US. Every photo, every interview, every keynote reinforced the same message. Binance was safe. Binance was trusted. Binance was the future. Customers believed it. Millions flocked to the platform, drawn by its low fees, fast withdrawals, and the sense that CZ was one of them, a builder, not a banker. And for a while, everything looked clean. Transaction volumes soared, regulators stayed quiet. Media outlets praised Binance as the engine of a new global financial system. But behind the scenes, the foundation was already cracking. Binance operated without a fixed headquarters, a structure that made it nearly impossible for any government to pin down which laws applied. More important, it allowed Binance's internal compliance rules to function like a revolving door. Accounts flagged as suspicious in one region could reappear in another with no meaningful oversight. Still, no one questioned it. After all, the platform seemed unstoppable, too big, too fast, too innovative to suspect. Then came the first flicker of doubt. Analysts at Chainalysis identified a series of wallets making rapid, repetitive transactions associated with known Chinese triad facilitators. The amounts were small at first, $50,000, $120,000, $300,000, but the pattern was unmistakable, the same laundering markers used by organized crime in other regions, and all of it flowed through Binance. Yet the alarms did not go off publicly. To investors, nothing looked wrong. To users, Binance continued to feel clean. CZ's reputation, the hoodie-wearing genius who built a trillion-dollar crypto ecosystem, held strong. But inside US agencies, that single pattern triggered a second look, then a third. And slowly, the illusion that Binance was simply a tech success story began to fade, revealing the first hints of a machine built for something far darker than innovation. When investigators finally peeled back the first layer of Binance's transaction flows, they discovered a mechanism far more advanced than anything typically seen in crypto fraud. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't sloppy, it was engineered. A global laundering conveyor belt built on speed, anonymity, and fragmentation. At the heart of it was P2P Binance, a system that allowed users to buy and sell crypto directly with each other using local currencies. To ordinary investors, it felt convenient. To OTC brokers linked to Chinese Triads, it was the perfect gateway. They moved millions in USDT, Tether, every day through accounts that never used real names, real documents, or real addresses. Binance's internal compliance system flagged thousands of these accounts, but according to the DOJ, they were allowed to stay active because shutting them down would hurt growth metrics. The flow began with criminal revenue, romance fraud victims in the US, enforced labor scam camps in Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, drug trafficking payments tied to the Sinaloa cartel. These groups all used Binance because it offered something they couldn't get anywhere else: instant settlement with no meaningful KYC barriers. A trafficker in Mexico could receive USDT from Asia in under a minute, convert it through a Triad-backed OTC broker in Guangzhou, and walk out with suitcases of cash, completely untraceable through the traditional banking system. The machinery worked like this. 1. Scam compounds in Myanmar stole millions from US victims using pig-butchering romance schemes. 2. The stolen funds were converted to crypto, usually USDT, then sent to Binance wallets controlled by handlers in China. 3. These wallets fragmented the money into dozens of smaller transfers to avoid triggering automated alerts, a process known as smurfing. 4. The funds were pushed through P2P trades, where Triad-affiliated brokers matched buyers and sellers in seconds. 5. Finally, the money exited into the real world through cash deliverers operating in Fujian, Guangdong, Bangkok, and Dubai. The numbers were staggering. Treasury analysts documented more than $900 million linked specifically to Chinese organized crime. Another $1.6 billion came from Southeast Asian scam networks, and nearly $300 million flowed from cartel operations tied to methamphetamine and fentanyl distribution. All of it traveled through Binance's infrastructure, and the laundering didn't stop at cash. One technique stunned investigators: the use of crypto mixers and chain hopping to blur transactional fingerprints. Criminal networks would move funds from Binance, Tron blockchain, Monero wallets, back into Binance, creating a transaction labyrinth that even blockchain analysts struggled to unravel. More than 14,000 wallets used this method between 2020-23. For victims, the consequences were devastating. A retired software engineer in Ohio lost $420,000 to a fake crypto mentor operating from a scam camp in Myanmar. A freelance designer in California wired $180,000 after being told her money was growing daily. All of it was crypto. All of it went through Binance. None of it could be recovered. By early 2023, US agencies finally recognized the truth. This wasn't a platform being abused by criminals. This was a platform whose design enabled them. Binance wasn't facilitating laundering by accident. Its structure had become the preferred financial engine for transnational crime. And if the mechanism was this effective at a technical level, the next question was even more disturbing. How large had the network grown? and how many governments had failed to see it. As investigators traced the early laundering patterns, one conclusion became impossible to ignore. The network built around Binance had grown so large, so fast, that it had effectively become a shadow banking system, one more powerful than the financial regulators trying to contain it. By 2022, Binance wasn't just a crypto exchange operating in the global economy. It was the global economy for anyone who needed money, moved quickly, discreetly, and without questions. The scale was unprecedented. Binance operated in over 180 countries, yet it had no permanent headquarters, a strategic ambiguity that allowed it to slip through regulatory gaps. If a government demanded compliance documents, Binance simply shifted operations to another jurisdiction. If a watchdog raised an alert, Binance rerouted servers and accounts. CZ called it decentralization. Investigators called it something else: regulatory evasion by design. This flexibility attracted legitimate traders, but it also drew the world's most sophisticated criminal actors. The platform's top-volume VIP clients were not hedge funds or tech firms. They were Chinese OTC brokers, Burma scam lords, Philippine online gambling tycoons, and money movers tied to Mexican cartels. Internal chats obtained by the DOJ revealed employees acknowledging that some VIP accounts were high risk, but shutting them down would impact market share. The more the network grew, the more emboldened its operators became. Scam compounds in Myanmar's Kokang region, many staffed by trafficked workers, began processing millions through Binance every week. These facilities weren't small operations. They were fortified compounds with armed guards, drone surveillance, and prison-like dormitories. Their revenue depended on one thing: the ability to instantly convert stolen money into crypto, then convert that crypto into cash through Binance's P2P marketplace. Meanwhile, in Dubai, where CZ increasingly based himself, Binance developed a separate ecosystem of private clients, including real estate developers who accepted payments exclusively in USDT. Some of these buyers were later identified as intermediaries for Southeast Asian cybercrime groups and Chinese underground banking networks. Despite mounting red flags, Binance's public image flourished. CZ appeared on stages at global blockchain summits, projected as a symbol of crypto's unstoppable future. Every major downturn in the crypto market only strengthened his reputation as a steady hand, a man who could be trusted when everything else was collapsing. But behind the scenes, US investigators were quietly building what one Treasury official later described as the biggest crypto case since Bitcoin's inception. The turning point came when agents tracked a $130 million transfer from a Myanmar scam hub through Binance into an intermediary wallet, then straight into an account in Mexico City linked to a fentanyl precursor distributor. That connection, Asia's cybercrime world merging with Mexico's drug trade, shocked investigators. It meant Binance wasn't just enabling digital scams, it was fueling global narcotics trafficking. From that moment, the DOJ knew Binance was no longer too big to ignore. It had become too big to allow to continue. What no one outside the investigation knew yet was that the US had already begun preparing a coordinated strike. And when that strike arrived, it would reshape the entire crypto industry and topple the man who built the empire. The takedown of Binance didn't happen overnight. It unfolded like a slow tightening of a net, one woven by the Department of Justice, the Treasury, and IRS-CI, all working in near silence. The turning point came when Malaysian authorities arrested a tether broker tied to Chinese underground banks. During interrogation, he revealed the very thing investigators suspected but couldn't prove. The brokers were using Binance's P2 network because no other platform lets us move money that fast without IDs. That statement triggered what US officials internally called Operation Crypto Siege, a coordinated, multi-agency crackdown on the world's largest crypto exchange. In mid-2023, Treasury analysts finished mapping the laundering routes, more than $7 billion in illicit flows traced through Binance, connecting Chinese Triads, Myanmar scam compounds, Philippine gambling rings, and Mexican narcotics distributors. The evidence was overwhelming, and the DOJ moved in. Agents subpoenaed internal chat logs, KYC review sheets, and deleted compliance memos. What they found was devastating. One internal message from a compliance officer read, "If we enforce stricter checks, we lose volume." Another from an executive admitted, "Drug money keeps liquidity high in some regions." The illusion of ignorance shattered completely. On a cold morning in November 2023, the DOJ summoned Zhao Changpeng to the US under the guise of finalizing regulatory negotiations. Instead, he was presented with a choice: contest the charges and risk extradition battles spanning years, or plead guilty, pay the fines, and accept a prison sentence. CZ chose the second. In an unprecedented settlement, Binance agreed to pay $4.3 billion, the largest penalty ever imposed on a crypto company. CZ resigned, admitted to failing to maintain an effective anti-money laundering program, and prepared to surrender for sentencing. The scene shocked the world. The man who built the most powerful exchange on Earth stood before a federal judge acknowledging responsibility for enabling international crime. But beneath the headlines, investigators were grappling with an even darker truth. Even after the settlement, even after CZ stepped down, the flow of illicit funds did not stop. Treasury analysts detected more than $700 million moving through wallets historically linked to triad operators and scam lords, suggesting that parts of the laundering architecture remained very much alive. That lingering activity raised an unsettling question: was Binance the problem, or merely the doorway? As investigators probed deeper, they discovered offshore entities in Cambodia, Vanuatu, and Dubai, suddenly ramping up activity, almost as if preparing to absorb the flows displaced by Binance's collapse. Several wallets began interacting heavily with newer platforms and OTC desks attempting to recreate the same P2P loopholes. One internal memo put it bluntly: "We closed the exchange, we didn't close the network." The fall of CZ was dramatic. The fall of Binance was historic. But to the agencies racing against time, this was only the beginning. What they dismantled was the world's biggest crypto exchange. What remained was a decentralized criminal financial system, one that didn't need a CEO or a headquarters or even a name. The real war, they realized, was just starting. When the DOJ announced the historic $4.3 billion settlement and the downfall of CZ, the world believed the crypto laundering problem had finally met its reckoning. But inside the Treasury's intelligence division, nobody celebrated. Because as soon as Binance slowed, something far more disturbing began: a migration. Like a living organism adapting to survive, the financial network that had once flowed through Binance started reappearing across new platforms, faster, stealthier, and even more decentralized. The first signs emerged in Cambodia, where investigators discovered a payment ecosystem known as Huione Pay, used heavily by scam compounds and trafficking syndicates. The platform moved millions using USDT, Chinese payment processors, and underground banking routes, all without touching Binance. What alarmed Treasury analysts was not just the volume, but the participants. Several wallets tied to Triad brokers previously active on Binance suddenly became active there, as if the network had known exactly where to go next. Then came Vanuatu, a tiny island nation with almost no regulatory oversight. Within weeks of Binance's settlement, new offshore exchanges appeared on incorporation records, companies controlled by nominees with Chinese surnames, offering instant OTC liquidity and anonymous crypto swaps. The structures mirrored the architecture of Binance's old P2P marketplace, only smaller and harder to track. Investigators believed these firms represented the next evolution, dozens of mini Binances, each small enough to avoid global scrutiny. Meanwhile, in Dubai, where CZ had built much of his empire, a cluster of private OTC desks began marketing themselves directly to Chinese underground banking networks. Their services sounded familiar: fast liquidation of USDT, no KYC for trusted clients, conversion to dirhams, yuan, or dollars within minutes. Several of these desks were found interacting with wallets previously involved in cyber slavery operations in Myanmar and Laos, a sign that the network had simply shifted its center of gravity. But the most troubling discovery was the rise of grey RMB channels, vast underground liquidity pools used to move yuan in and out of China without detection. For years, these channels operated mostly through cash couriers and traditional hawala brokers. Now, with Binance destabilized, they began integrating heavily with crypto. Treasury analysts estimated that $40–50 billion may have passed through these hybrid systems in the last 5 years, dwarfing even the Binance flows. And then came the revelation that disturbed investigators the most. Some parts of the network had never relied on Binance in the first place. They used chain-hopping mixers, privacy coins like Monero, and offshore custodial wallets to ensure that even the fall of the largest exchange wouldn't threaten the core structure. Binance, they realized, was not the foundation of the laundering ecosystem. It was simply the most convenient doorway. In an internal report, one analyst summarized the threat this way: "We shut down the airport. The planes didn't stop. They just switched to unregulated runways." The hidden network thrives because it does not need a CEO, a headquarters, or a legal entity. It exists wherever technology and law fail to intersect. And as long as global enforcement is fragmented, US regulators chasing crimes in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian police chasing crimes in China, China ignoring crimes targeting the West, this architecture will persist. Which leads to the question haunting investigators even now: if $7 billion flowed through one exchange before it was caught, how many billions are already moving through systems no one is watching or even knows exist? In the end, the fall of Binance and CZ wasn't the conclusion of a story. It was the beginning of a warning. A warning about what happens when technology grows faster than the laws meant to govern it. A warning about how $7 billion can move across borders, through criminal hands, and into legitimate economies without anyone realizing until it's too late. And a warning that the villains of the digital age no longer need guns, masks, or borders. They only need code, silence, and a platform willing to look the other way. Thousands of victims across the United States lost their savings to romance scams, crypto traps, and digital fraud networks operating from compounds they will never see. Compounds that flourished because the world's biggest exchange made their money liquid. And even as the DOJ dismantled the empire and held CZ accountable, what remains is the part few people ever think about: the infrastructure that survived him. Because this case was never just about one CEO or one company, it was about a system, sprawling, adaptive, and hidden beneath layers of blockchain transactions and offshore havens, that continues to evolve long after its figurehead has fallen. So the real question is not whether Binance has been punished. The real question is, how many more networks are still out there, thriving in the blind spots of a world not prepared to police them? You've been watching China Classified. Until the next case, stay aware.